Great, we're live. So, hi Cam followers, it's lovely to see you today. I am so honoured to have the wonderful Sarah Fisher with us, and so I'll let her introduce herself and tell us a little bit about what she does and how she's sort of come to where she is now.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Fisher, and I'm going to share tonight information about ACE freework, but I will also give you a little bit of background about how ACE came to be. My original background was training in human massage and obviously studying human anatomy and physiology, but also having a great passion for animals. And I've had animals in my life since I was 4, started riding at 4, and was lucky enough to have my first dog when I was 11. While I was qualified in human massage, anatomy and physiology, but one of our horses, when he was 2, fell in a field and rotated his pelvis really badly, and I wasn't really sure whether we were doing the right thing in keeping him alive, whether he would have quality of life. So I started to look for therapies that might be of help for him. And I was very lucky, actually. My first livery yard where we kept our horses in Surrey, they were really pro physio, which actually wasn't that common in those days, and also really good equine dental care, which really wasn't common in those days. So I was very lucky that I had horses in that environment. And it was sort of searching for things that I could do to help my horse that would fit alongside the physiotherapy he was having, that led me to discover Tellington Touch. And there was a reference to Linda Tellington-Jones, recognizing the link between posture and behavior. And that really sparked my interest because I could relate to the effects that body tension has on emotions and vice versa in my human background. So that set me off exploring T-Touch bodywork and also the in-hand groundwork exercises to help strengthen my horse's posture and to give him as much freedom of movement through the body as was possible. So that set that trail off, and our horse lived till he was about 28. He did have arthritis.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. He did have arthritis eventually in the lumbar spine, and that's when I recognized that we probably needed to put him down. He's a really big horse as well, but he had a really fulfilling life. Well, I hope he did. How can we ever know? But it was really lovely to be able to do things myself that also fitted alongside all the other therapies that we were able to do for him, including acupuncture and things like that. So then from there, I started to work with dogs as well. And what was interesting, coming from originally a horse background, was recognizing that in the canine world, we really weren't understanding so many layers as we did if we were around horses or working with horses. So we didn't really look at movement in dogs particularly, and really didn't look at the layers of all the behavior as well that we might be seeing. And I think it was probably 25 years ago when I started to work with dogs. I was at a rescue centre and was asked to look at a dog that had bitten 3 times. And the dog was overweight and was not moving efficiently. So I asked when the bites had occurred, and back then people didn't really think about the detail of what happened around a dog bite. A dog bit or the dog didn't bite. So the amazing team member said, well, actually, thinking about it, is when this dog was lifted into a car, and when he was lifted onto the vet table for his first health check, and then I think the 3rd time was when he was being groomed. And I said, well, look, the dog's overweight and he's not moving efficiently. You might need to do some more exploration around that. And they said, well, they thought the dog was lame because he was overweight. And I said, no, I think he's overweight because movement's not comfortable. And we started to sort of look at his whole frame and the coat, and this line of hair on his right hind was significantly different in terms of the direction of the hair to all the hair on the rest of the body. So it looked like it was potentially hair that had grown over scar tissue. And I said, have you noticed this line of hair? I think this dog needs to go back for further veterinary investigations. Something's happened to this leg at some point. And sure enough,
we just missed so he went back for a veterinary examination, did he?
Yes, and the vet discovered that at some point the dog had a broken leg and a plate had been fitted. The dog was a stray, so they didn't have any history on him, and the pins in that plate were starting to move and come out. And of course, how do you pick up a dog? You engage the hind legs to pick him up, to put him in the car, to put him on the vet table. And it was the right hind leg that was being groomed when he turned and bit the person who was doing the grooming. So that set me off looking at hair patterns as well, and just started to see more and more detail in not just how the dog organized his body, but also what information was there in the coat, how the dog habitually organized his tail. And over 25 years, really, I've discovered everything we could want to know about our amazing companions is there right in front of us.
So yeah, that's amazing. And I think now the veterinary world is just catching up with all the sort of work on fascia and the myofascial, and looking more at that as and really understanding that actually that can be a real source of pain for our dogs as well, and how that can influence the coat pattern. And so that explains now everything that you were noticing 25 years ago, but we're only just catching up.
Well, it's really funny, isn't it? Because I was going back over a book I'd written, something like 2008, and it sort of jumped out because I always talk about correlations. Don't look for causes necessarily. Look for links. Look for patterns, and that will help direct you and take you down the route of further veterinary investigation. And then that vet can refer you to a veterinary physiotherapist, maybe, or might take you down the path of recognizing you need to make adaptations to your home, cover slippery floors, for example, or modify the games you play, or modify how you handle your dog. And in this book, I'd referenced, in my experience, so many dogs that were noise sensitive went on to be diagnosed with arthritis. And of course, now that study's been done, that we recognize now that pain does increase noise sensitivity. So, trust what you're seeing. Don't discount anything. Keep questioning everything, because that is the premise of ACE, really giving animals voice and a choice, and really helping animals and their guardians to fall in love with learning. So I've got some slides I can share on some of the postural things that I look for, and some of the stuff that we cover in our online courses. So included in the ACE approach really is sort of understanding that link between posture and behaviour as well that I was talking about, because I started to look in more detail at what posture I would see in an animal that may display more spooky behaviours. And again, coming from that horse background, originally my thought process was that if a horse was dropped in the back and the head was high, and that was activating the sympathetic nervous system, the part of the nervous system responsible for fight and flight, it was probably due to either foot balance or dental imbalance, or maybe a saddle that didn't fit, or maybe an unbalanced rider. And that was kind of my belief system. And certainly those are contributory factors to how a horse might drop in the back and elevate the head and become tight in the tail and lose freedom of movement through all four limbs. But I actually started to see the same postural patterns in other animals too, animals including sheep and dogs. And of course, we don't ride those, and we don't obviously need to ensure that the foot balance is correct in animals, because they don't have well, certainly dogs don't have hooves that constantly grow. But obviously we do need to look at foot balance. So part of my observations when we were looking in more detail with the dogs was to actually look at the nail wear, but also the shape and the feeling of the dog's pads.
I remember, yeah, a couple of years
Yeah,
ago. And there was a dog at the National Behaviour Conference, like an English bulldog, and you were looking at the wear on their paw pads, and he was pressing more on the outside of his paw. And just those little things were just, yeah, really opened my eyes.
and I just think I still miss so much stuff. Again, going back over the old books or the old photographs, or even photographs I took last year, I see more detail. And again, we add that obviously into all our courses and all my teaching. But I don't think I'll ever stop learning, and I hope I never stop learning, because I think the day we stop learning is the day we probably should stop teaching. So within ACE, it's also reward-based training, but really encouraging people to keep asking questions, keep questioning your belief system, keep questioning what you think you might be seeing, but also trust what you're seeing. But know that everything is connected. There's reason for absolutely everything, and that includes all movement patterns too. So when we're looking in more detail at the animal, like I said, everything you could want to know is there. And I think it's of great value in rescue, particularly because obviously we don't always know the history of that animal. So it was rescue dogs that have shaped a lot of what ACE is today, because although I trained in T-touch, obviously, and find that hugely beneficial for many animals in changing their expectation of what hand contact might mean, many dogs in rescue really don't enjoy body contact because their whole world's changed. Quite often, the stress levels are really high as well. And many dogs with behavioural struggles have got undiagnosed pain, and that includes gut discomfort too. We're not just talking the skeleton or muscles, we're talking pain from tension in the jaw or pain from digestive sensitivities. We're looking at discomfort that's triggered by equipment that might not have been changed as the dog was growing. And so many dogs that have been that I've connected with in rescue, when the caregivers take the collar off, there's actual indentations in the neck, just because the original caregiver may never have thought to change that collar or take that collar off that dog to give that dog a break from wearing something permanently around his neck. So we're also looking at the set of the ears and the height and the mobility of the limbs too, and looking at the blink rate of dogs and really starting to gauge, particularly with those rescue dogs, how can we help them feel relaxed so that contact does actually become rewarding for them. And looking as well at how they might move when on the lead, and what is that muscle development? Is it even on both sides of the neck? Or has some of the early education of that dog, or lack of early education, started to reinforce postural patterns that might have been there from birth, or have been created just through lack of awareness of the impact that our interactions have on the amazing canine body? And you start to be able to piece together as well that for a long time I was would be obviously teaching body contact, and recognize that dogs actually often are more comfortable with contact on their chest, for example, but that even with familiar people, dogs in novel environments were really sensitive to contact from the middle of the back through the lower back, the lumbar spine. So that also got me thinking about, was that to do with the sympathetic nervous system? It wasn't just dogs in rescue that were sensitive to contact because that person might be unfamiliar. It was also to do with all the other information in what was obviously a novel environment for rescue dogs, but also a novel environment for dogs that were attending workshops or coming for one-to-one sessions. So again, looking at how we could help those dogs relax more quickly in a novel environment, I started to include more things like snuffle mats and really simple Nina Ottosson games when they were first out. And again, watching dogs being able to engage and use their nose was just mind-blowing how quickly they settled in that novel environment, being able to engage in relaxing and rewarding activities. And as the dogs were relaxing, of course, the guardians were relaxing as well. But it took me a while to kind of piece it all together. And that's really what ACE free work is. It's kind of all those experiences shaped particularly by amazing dogs in rescue. So you could say ACE has been created by dogs for dogs.
Can I just quickly just double check with you? Are you meant to be going through the slideshow because we currently can't see it moving?
Oh, yes, it is moving my end.
Hang on then.
Don't worry. I can just talk and show pictures.
And then add to the stream again. Why isn't it? At the moment, all I can see is the animal-centred education first page. It hasn't gone.
If I do it on that one, is that better?
Yeah, that does work. So I think that I can see the little picture of the ginger and white dog with the ears is a really good example of what you were saying that we didn't get to see when you were talking about ear position.
Let's go to Pansy. Shall we start there then?
Yeah, that'd be perfect. Yeah, thank you.
No problem. This is a new format for me. I'm a bit more au fait with Zoom, but who knew we'd all have to become good IT experts to continue to work with animals? If you look at Pansy's ears, you can see that her right ear tip points to the side of the screen, but her left ear tip points down. So you can see straight away that actually her ear position is unlevel, and obviously that's not uncommon. Nothing in nature is symmetrical. But another link that I started to discover was dogs that have habitually different ears are often unbalanced or have restricted movement, normally in the hindquarter, and that restricted movement in the hindquarter is changing how the dog uses his neck in terms of balance, and it might be that that's starting to change the position and set of the ear. Also need to look at the neck as well and what's going on through the forequarters, because everything is connected. But a dog has 18 muscles in each ear, around 18 muscles. So if one ear is tighter, you might notice as well that the dog doesn't really use that ear to listen, regardless of the direction of the sound. And when you start to look at your dog's ears, you might then start noticing that actually the eyes are unlevel. And again, remember, nothing in nature is symmetrical. You're going to find imbalance in every dog to a degree. But if you also look at her neck, you can see she's got more muscle development on the left side of her neck, which could be due to the way she's sitting and organizing her body. But it might also be linked to the reason why she can only sit on one hip, maybe, or why she has to twist her body and maybe only lie on one side and not actually be able to lie on both the left side and the right side of her body when she's at rest. So we're starting to look for clues and see, is this actually just a moment the camera's caught in time, or is this a specific pattern? And then if you look at her tongue, you can see that she has more tongue on the left side of her mouth, and the canine tooth, there's a little sticky up bump you can see under the tongue, has also got more tongue over it on the left side rather than the right. So that's how we start sort of building this profile when we're on the dog detective trail. And if you look at this lovely, amazing picture of Vixen, you can see her left ear is much higher than her right ear. So if I see a dog whose ear position is like this the majority of the time, I would absolutely encourage that guardian to do to have a thorough vet check, because in my experience, it often is linked to restricted movement, quite often through the hindquarters. And you can also start to see as well where the hair patterns will change around ears, maybe one ear hangs more to the side if you've got a dog with longer ear flaps, but maybe the hair on one side of the head sticks up more around that base of the ear. So again, starting to look for more and more detail and how it might affect how loose or tight a dog is through all the other structures in the head. There's over 100 muscles in the dog's head. So again, there's a lot of tension that we might see in the head that we might not have recognized is actually linked to tension in other parts of the body. And then, of course, looking through the rest of the dog's body, start to see how does that dog organize his body when he's standing, what's the paw placement, but also what's going on with the coat. And if you look at this picture of the collie, if you can see that picture, you can see there's a complete square of hair over the middle of the back. And Maria Johnston's amazing veterinary physio has been teaching anatomy and physiology at Tilley Farm since 2013. And Maria certainly added more layers to my learning. And that square is over a really important part of the dog's spine, the T13-L1 junction. And lots of dogs overwork that area, again, because of restricted movement through the hindquarters. So we're looking all the time for all these clues, piecing it together, getting the right teams involved to help restore as efficient movement as is possible for that dog. And looking at movement, again, does that shoulder blade really move forward, or is the dog lifting from the elbow, as this dog's doing in this picture? And that dog's neck looks concertinaed and his back looks tight when you really start to look through all the clues in his body. And the dog doesn't have a collarbone like we do. It's really important that all those muscles are free that attach that shoulder blade to the dog's frame. And there was a saying with horses, the front foot will go as far as the nose allows. And again, I started to see that in dogs, that the tip of the paw will extend just past that dog's nose. So if that neck structure is tight and there's restricted movement through the back, the stride will often be much shorter, so a dog will become more fatigued on exercise, more sensitive to body contact after a period of rest after exercise, potentially. So again, we start to understand that our dogs actually aren't unpredictable. They might be uncomfortable sometimes, depending on when they're touched, how they're touched, and also where they're touched. And in all my 25 years plus of working with dogs, I have not come across an unpredictable dog. They're really predictable when we start to recognize those patterns. And if you look at the next frame, if I can get it to move, come on. Doesn't want to play ball. Sorry, got stuck. You can see that in a similar posture, this dog has actually got more freedom of movement through the body, so the neck's longer, there's better stride length, easier for this dog to cover the ground, and he just looks generally freer through the body. Mm-hmm. And one new discovery for me is starting to recognize again something that I saw in horses, but just hadn't pieced together with dogs, that where we start to get tighter structures on one side of the dog's head, we might actually start to recognize they get more weepy eye or more gunk, more room in the eye. And so we're sharing this with some of the ACE students who started to share photographs, and this is Delicious Blaze, who was tighter on the right shoulder, I think, the week that his right eye started to run as well. And of course, we want to look at what is linked to maybe lack of education, or actually is it lack of balance? Because if you look at this dog, we could say this dog doesn't know how to walk on a loose lead, for example. This dog actually probably can't walk in balance, because if you look at the shoulders, there's a lot more muscle development around those shoulders and the neck. The hair around the neck and the shoulders is coarser, and the dog's developing what I call an Elizabethan ruff. And if you then look through the dog's back and hindquarters, there isn't really any well-defined muscle there at all. So the dog's having to pull himself along on the forequarter, and that starts to increase that muscle bulk around the forequarters of the dog and starts to change the appearance of the hair too. So of course, this dog is going to struggle on the lead. because the dog is going to struggle to balance, full stop. Can you see the screen still? I just want to check in.
Yeah, I can still see the screen.
Great. So what part do we play as well in reinforcing the natural one-sidedness in dogs? And again, obviously, we're aware of that to some degree with horses, but we still habitually handle them from our right side. So right from an early age, we're pulling or potentially pulling that horse onto the left fore. But in dogs, we're actually doing the same. By handling our dogs on the left side, that dog is often trying to lean away from us and again loading that left fore. And that can start to restrict even more movement through that right hind leg. And also how we deliver rewards, whether it's treats or a toy, tends to be in the same way all the time. So we often encourage a head tilt in our dogs if we deliver that treat from the same hand at the same height every time we want to reward or reinforce something. But it's the same when we offer them toys too. We often throw them in the same direction, hopefully not too far, drop a toy to the floor. But if you hold a toy for your dog to come and take again, it's often held at the same height each time. So how many repetitions is that dog performing in terms of how he's organizing his body based on our habits, which then starts to reinforce habits that aren't so beneficial for that dog long term. And it actually can happen really quickly that we reinforce a posture incorrectly by mistake.
That's so interesting. Helen Cooks just asked a really good question.
Fire away.
Is it a good idea to encourage walking on both sides of the owner when we're talking about balance?
Yes. But it's really hard because it's really hard for us to change our habits. And that's where free work can be really helpful, because it's actually easier to teach loose lead walking without a lead, because you get to be able to recognize how the dog likes to organize his body. And also we might need to reconsider how we teach loose lead walking. If you think about how loose lead walking is often taught, it's with the dog twisting and looking up at us, and we're looking down and maintaining this lovely connection. But what's happening is that dog is leaning even more onto the left fore,
like this the entire time,
twisting through the body and looking up at us. And that's really hard for dogs to maintain that posture, but particularly when they're growing through puppyhood and then adolescence, where there's obviously rapid skeletal growth too. So we need to think about teaching our dogs to move in better balance by moving forward with a check-in maybe on a cue, rather than this being the habitual way we're teaching our dogs to remain engaged. And the other thing about that I really question is, when we're teaching a dog to look up at us, are we really helping that dog to walk in balance? We're actually obviously reinforcing imbalance when we start to think about it. But also, does the dog only slow down because as the head lifts, the stride shortens? Remember what I was sharing in those photographs of those dogs running. The front leg will go as far as the nose allows. So have we shown the dog how he can reorganize his body to keep pace with us, because dogs naturally outwalk us? Or have we just kind of cheated a bit by elevating his head and getting that stride to shorten? So yes, if you can, teach walking on both sides of the body, because what happens from the dog's tongue right through to his tail, if he's habitually handled on one side, is quite extraordinary, shall I say. And I'm really lucky. I get to work with all types of dogs, and I've been working with amazing groups of working dogs recently. And really interesting that the handlers who work their dogs on both sides of their body, their dogs are really straight through the pelvis, the tail is in the middle, it waves to the left and to the right. The dog's top line is strong, and the dog can really lengthen, like amazing, beautiful balanced frame that is effortless for that dog. And when the dog's jumping straight, incredible. And then the dogs that are habitually handled on one side, their pelvis is already starting to tilt. The tail is habitually curved to the right. The tongue hangs out to the right side of the mouth, and the dogs are already starting to crab through the body. And when they're jumping, do they jump straight? They can't. They're drifting off to the left. So as well as obviously in the short term, movement being much easier when the dog is in good balance and is strong and structures can lengthen and strengthen, the crooked dog is going to obviously fatigue more quickly, but also he's going to be more prone to injury and his working life is going to be shortened too. So that's why I really love sharing all the stuff that I'm sharing tonight, because once we start to recognize it, we start to be able to make change.
Hugely. And Bill Boots just written a comment that's really made me think, because I grew up in the sort of obedience, and I used to take my dogs to obedience classes every week, and we would learn heel work, and it was always on the one side. And I just think, oh my gosh, like all the potential sort of damage that we do just because we just don't know any better. Do you still advocate teaching walking to heel, but just learning on both sides? What's your opinion on that?
Oh, that's a good question. We need to help dogs function safely in our society, but we also need to be more aware, I think, of the impact of all that education, or the impact that education is having, not just in terms of physical well-being, but obviously emotional well-being too. There's nothing wrong with teaching obedience, provided we know that we need to then give that dog the opportunity to move freely, to kind of have a reset and to have access to good checks with veterinary physio or massage or any other therapeutic modality. We also need to make sure that if we're handling our dog primarily from our left side, and that does have to happen in some situations with some working dogs for sure, that we actually make sure we teach left flexions. Because another habit that I've watched, and I do it too, another habit that I've been really aware of is that if we've got our dog on our left side and we're doing like beautiful work, rewarding this incredible companion, and we're advancing his education and we're expanding his world, if we see something, or the dog sees something that he perceives to be threatening or just causes a bit of alarm and we decide to change direction, we tend to then turn the dog to the right. So again, we're reinforcing this crookedness. We don't often step around the dog and teach the dog to flex to the left. So again, once we know that, we can build that in so that we're not reinforcing and building crookedness, because we wouldn't go to the gym and just do bicep curls with our right arm. We just wouldn't do it. And really interesting, I was working with assistance dogs sometime. I do quite a lot of work with assistance dogs, but this particular group, amazing, lots of lovely, incredible reward-based engagement I was watching, and I was looking at these young dogs and they were already developing a head tilt, and they were bowing from the hock down to the paw on the right hind. The hock's a sticky out bit on the back of a dog's leg. And what was really quite extraordinary was how quickly that pattern was happening, and they had to have their dogs on their left. And all we did was change the treat delivery to help the caregiver see when it was easier for the dog to take that treat with a lower head rather than sort of snatching and twisting the head to get that treat. Because again, it's pure biomechanics. We don't need to spend time teaching dogs to take treats gently if we just lower our hand most of the time. But again, we treat high, so they take the treat and snatch that treat. So again, lowering the hand makes it easier for the dog to sort of lengthen and to be straighter in the body. Also said, look, that's fine that the dog's on your left side, but teach more left flexions and make sure you're aware of turning your dog to the left as well as to the right when you need to change direction with the dog. So make sure that's included in your daily handling and the education of that dog. It's not that we need to find extra time to help our dogs. We just need to do different things with the time that we have with them. And I went back a few weeks later to deliver part 2, and the change again in these dogs was phenomenal. They were stronger and straighter, and also they could stay engaged for longer, because dogs don't get distracted, in my humble opinion. They disengage, and they disengage because something is difficult for them, or repetition is too boring, or they don't understand what it is we're asking them to do. And I always liken it to when I was at school, during art and biology and music and history and geography. I couldn't tell you what was going on outside because I loved all those lessons. But maths, I was an authority on the wildlife in the school grounds. I disengaged because I just didn't enjoy it. I like figures, but I just didn't enjoy it. So again, we need to keep questioning. What is it? What can we change? How can we help this dog learn, stay engaged, stay focused with us rather than shifting focus to something else in the environment? So again, that comes down to, good observations. And some puppies are born with, quite significant physical problems, not just in terms of the genetics of their makeup, in terms of skeleton and everything else, and heart and everything else, but also in terms of what might happen as part of the birthing process. And this little puppy had really thickened muscles on the right side of his neck, and that was identified really early on. So he came down to me on foster with a sibling, and what was absolutely incredible was using all the different approaches of different textures underfoot that I brought with me from my human knowledge into working with dogs. This puppy and his sibling grew more quickly in terms of emotional and physical development. And when they went back for their microchips, they had more bone and better muscle, were calmer, were not fazed by being in novel situations, compared to their 6 litter mates who'd been exposed to great learning in the shelter, but just hadn't had the same opportunities as these 2 puppies had at the farm. So that really started to sow lots of seeds about how we can influence the nervous system, influencing the whole body, not just thinking of focusing on educating the dog's brain. So again, that's another piece to that sort of ACE story.
And just while we're talking about that, I'll just bring up this question because this is a really interesting one. Oh, not that one, but that one is good. That one, just this one. Any advice for front leg amputees? He has massage and he does free work. And we were just talking about how to keep sort of a good balance in our dogs. How do we do that if they've only got 3 legs, for example?
Oh,
can we help them?
Yes, of course. There's always something that you can do. And it sounds like you're doing amazing things anyway with massage. But also just making sure that you build like really good experiences by your hand contact, like really slow stroking, well worth exploring some T-touch body work so that you can be part of the maintenance as well. And also learning to feel for temperature changes in the body. Lots of dogs, if they're overworking the middle part of the back where that hair was raised on the collie, that will have heat there if they have got a lot of discomfort in the body, or if they've been really excited by something or stressed by something. But they may also have cold areas in the lumbar spine, and that's often linked to more chronic situations. So maybe chronic pain that's been there for a while. And again, maybe just have been missed because dogs are just so good at compensating and shifting their posture all the time. Humans do it too, actually, but we just don't recognize it in ourselves or our companions. So really learning to feel the texture of the coat as well, because again, the coat will change texture where there's reduced mobility through the skin, where there's changes to the development of the muscle. So again, being aware of these tiny changes And maybe when we touch our dog in the middle of the back, say, they might start blinking really quickly or stop blinking for a moment. That's the nervous system giving you feedback that something feels different or maybe uncomfortable. So again, building in slow hand contact with your dog every day can be really beneficial. And I might just start with the back of the hand, or just do 1 or 2 strokes with the palm of my hand, and then take my hand away and see if my dog invites more contact, or needs a moment to think about it, or maybe actually shifts posture and directs me away from a part of their body. So again, when we look at how a dog might seek contact, we might say, oh, my dog loves being touched around the head, because the dog's always putting his head on my knee, for example. But we need to keep that question mark and say, does the dog love body contact on the head, or is the dog trying to keep your hands away from sensitive hindquarters? So again, you can do a lot for your dog, because of course he's going to have a shift in his balance, but it doesn't mean he can't discover freedom of movement within those limitations. And that's what our focus is on in ACE. It's not, is the movement good or bad? Is it efficient? Is it flexible? How fluid can we help that animal move? And when animals are fluid through the body and flexible through the body, they're often more flexible in the mind too. And that was another parallel that I saw, that dogs that were really tight often had one way of expressing themselves when they were excited or when they were anxious about something. And again, recognizing that actually anxiety and excitement have similar impact on the body. The responses internally are pretty well the same. So again, looking for the clues so we can actually say, is it excitement, or is there anxiety beneath what we perceive to be an excited dog? So all of these things, as I said, sort of all came together using like scent items and different textures underfoot, and different textures that dogs could touch with their tongue, in terms of having licky paste on different surfaces as well. And now we have licky mats as well. And it all kind of fell into place thanks to a young dog who came to live with me about 4 years ago. And the free work that he helped structure has become a quite extraordinary tool that we can use for helping animals engage in rewarding activities on their, as a sort of enrichment activity on its own, but also as a teaching tool for us to enhance our own observations of our animals, for us to be able to help recognize postural struggles our dogs may have, so we can ensure that we get the right help for our canine companions, but also for people to use who work in animal rescue, for physiotherapists as part of the assessment process, and also to help that dog settle in that novel environment in the way I used to originally just use some scent items like snuffle mats and things. It's also great in grooming salons, sort of modified versions, so that the dogs get breaks in between grooming. And it's fantastic from an educational point of view, because again, we can see, does the dog actually only engage with us because we're the only source of food? Whereas within an ACE free work setup, because we start the sessions with little bits of food and the sensory items, the dog is free to engage with us at his own pace and then disengage, but still have access to food. So I think when we talk about reward-based training, we need to be really aware that not all reward-based training is rewarding for the dog. And sometimes I think we create a lot of conflict. The dog wants the food rather than that actual direct engagement. And again, that might be where we start to say, oh, my dog's got a really short attention span, question mark. Is it because what you're asking him to do is too difficult? Or you're asking him to maintain a posture that's too uncomfortable? Or is the substrate you're working on causing a problem for the dog? We just keep getting sort of more and more awareness of like these small threads that link together to create the bigger picture. And in ACE free work, we're really influencing, 7 senses, the 5 familiar senses, and then sort of the vestibular balance and proprioception as well. And vestibular balance obviously is part of your balance system, and proprioception gives you information about, where you are in space. And again, during growth spurts, dogs are clumsy. The vestibular system isn't fully developed. That rapid skeletal growth changes their ability to organize their body, and they get labeled as clumsy, and they can't maintain some of the body positions that we think we should be teaching them at a time when actually so much is changing for them. So again, free work through all stages of development is phenomenal.
There's been one question about Laura Eldridge has written, do dogs have a natural paw or handedness? Does this influence their symmetry? So are they born with sort of a left or a right-sided?
Yes.
Just like we are, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, excuse me, I think it was guide dogs in Australia did a study on the direction of the swirls on a dog's chest, whether they went clockwise or anti-clockwise, and how that linked to, I think, paw preference, and how that might have linked to learning as well. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that, but do check it out, because I think the information is available online, and somebody may actually be able to even share a link.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
So originally, when I started laying free work out, I think I definitely put way too much stuff out. So I now start with a really simple setup. And the reason that I started doing this with Henry was because he had a really well practiced behavior of really grabbing and mouthing, and there was no aggression, but it was really painful. So everything in his nervous system was driving him to leap up and grab, and that was his natural automatic response to me standing still, me moving, me sitting down on a chair, me sitting down on the sofa, even more so, being on a lead, bless him, being touched, absolutely everything. This dog was utterly overwhelmed by any sensory input at all. But he also needed to move. He found being still really difficult. And there was a few question marks that I had about his hips anyway. And he does have hip dysplasia. His right ear didn't move at all, much higher and over to the sort of more middle of his head than the one on his left side. And all the structures on the right side of his face were tight, and through the right side of his neck as well. So one of the things I did was just take the collar off after day 2 and just put him on a harness with a really long light cotton line, so he wasn't on a short lead, because that short lead can often reinforce that grabbing, leaping behavior, and also pulling, because it's not allowing that dog to organize his body in a way that's easier for him. And also short leads block that dog's ability to sniff the ground. But I also then wanted to build Henry's education using some movement, but giving his nervous system other things to think about rather than my position, my voice, my movement pattern. So I just started to teach him to walk towards one of the cavaletti blocks, and I would put a treat down on the cavaletti block in the indoor school. And he really quickly learned not to look and jump up at me, but to look forward and move towards a visual station. So that's also how free work sort of became the structured approach it is now. And the height of different items is really beneficial. And we had a Labrador on a workshop who, I can't remember what condition he'd been born with, but it had affected the structures of the hind legs. And his legs were really straight. For the life of me, I can't remember what the genetic problem was. And he was incredible, because when we put a treat on a chair, he could walk off in balance. So this is really valuable for the dog with 3 legs. But when his guardian was putting treats on the floor, he was tipping out of balance and then trotting after he picked up a treat, and his footfall was really heavy. And I said, but watch, when you put a treat on the chair, he floated for like 2-3 strides and he was light on his paws. So Henry and this Labrador kind of really opened my eyes to playing with the stations where we might deliver those food rewards.
That's really interesting, actually, because we've been looking at feeding heights with a couple of other speakers, and particularly we had Julia from Galen Myotherapy was talking about how the dog looks when they are eating or getting a treat, and how comfortable they look, and finding that position is very dog dependent. Just as your example just then just illustrates, actually, that some dogs will really like picking it up off the floor, and others will really appreciate it being delivered at slightly higher or slightly lower.
And so many people that say, oh, my dog isn't food motivated. Why? Food's a primary reinforcer. Why doesn't the dog enjoy food? Are we going back to gut pain, or is it other physical discomfort, meaning the dog can't access that food source on the floor? So again, dogs that will just like rush around with snuffle mats on the floor, when you raise them, the dog actually can stay engaged, or put them on an angled stations, really beneficial for lots of dogs. Because you can see in the picture where Henry is looking from the green mat on the floor, that posture would not be possible in a dog that maybe had luxating patella or elbow dysplasia, because he wouldn't be able to maintain that sort of forward lean. And also, if I had a dog that pulled a lot and was in that forward lean position all the time on the lead, I probably wouldn't reinforce that position at first with only having food items at floor level. I would start to show that dog's body the possibility of bringing his moving his frame up, taking his weight back, standing in balance. I really start to explore what I'm seeing and how I can help that dog stay engaged with some of these items. I don't want stuff too high, I don't want stuff too low, but I want a variety of stuff. And also to recognize what is the dog actively avoiding, because lots of dogs will avoid soft surfaces too, like thick yoga mats in free work if they've got undiagnosed joint pain, or maybe they've got problems with soft tissue, and it's the sensation of that soft tissue lengthening as that dog steps onto something soft where there's more give, that causes that discomfort too. And another big parallel I'm seeing at the moment is dogs with digestive sensitivities often adopt a similar posture to a dog that has, for example, hip dysplasia. So again, in free work, we start to be able to sort of unpeel some of those threads and say which part of this dog's body needs that further veterinary input, and what might I need to do in my day-to-day management of my canine companion to maybe start to remove some of those postural struggles that I'm starting to observe. And if that dog plateaus in terms of his ability to remain engaged, why? Why does my dog get tired really quickly in free work? And that's often, again, due to undiagnosed pain. But if the dog's really busy after free work, why? Was it a type of treat that maybe caused some irritation to the stomach? Or was the dog engaging for too long? Or were there things on the floor that the dog had to step over because maybe too many items were put in that space? And maybe that's triggered something that actually now warrants further investigation too. So I always err on the side of caution, have less stuff, nothing that the dog has to walk over at first. Make sure we've got easy access treats on the floor as well as on the other items. And start watching your dog and gather data from him as he's gathering data from that environment. And Pansy, our lovely sight hound, whose headshot I used at the beginning of the presentation, The image on the left side where she's licking from the same bone puzzle feeder setup that Henry was using in the previous slide, you can see that she's quite dropped in the upper part of her thoracic spine, and that her tail's kind of held out to help her balance. And she looks a little roached through the lower back rather than just sort of a curve through the whole back. But the picture on the right side of the screen was Pansy in her second session, and you can see that she's just got more movement in general through her whole back. And although she came to me for a session because of her sort of habitual jumping up and enthusiastic greeting, what we actually discovered in that first session was not just ways to help Pansy relax and release tension from her body and learn, you know, that we don't all have to touch her. So she didn't need to sort of indicate her sensitivity to body contact by this enthusiastic greeting behaviour, that we were going to modify our hand contact around her. We also learned from that session that Pansy nearly always moved anti-clockwise around the room, nearly always walked to the left. And that was a huge piece of information, because she was often handled from the person's left side. When she was worried by something in the environment that started her lunging and barking, she was turned to the right. And at that point, she couldn't take a food reward. So gathering that data, we were able to switch the side that she was handled on. And you can see from that second picture, just that one session started to free up her body. So body contact, as we drip fed slow body contact in, became more rewarding for Pansy. But all that data also enabled us to make sure that she had further vet checks. She had some health issues that needed to be addressed first, and she had arthritis in her neck, lumbar spine, and she'd been born with a deformed spine. So all of that information just from that first session not only changed Pansy's movement, we were able to maintain that by then making necessary adaptations to general handling and also how her education was built. And Pansy went on to get a home, which is obviously deeply rewarding for me.
Yeah.
And lovely Blaze, he's a 9-year-old Labrador who just has a massive piece of my heart, and he has spinal problems. They were diagnosed when he was quite young, and his amazing guardian Becky uses free work to help maintain a sort of fluid movement through his body, improve his balance. And the natural ridges in his coat were really quite pronounced prior to starting free work, but they've become less exaggerated. So again, we're looking at, are those coat patterns normal? Where are we starting from? Are they a normal part of the dog's coat? But also, are they a little bit more exaggerated? Again, because of the way the dog's organising his body. And Blaze struggled doing his physio exercises on the lead, so Becky puts those into free work. So we can use free work for so many different things. And we also then teach things like the bucket game, modified version of Chirag Patel's bucket game, and I encourage people to teach their dog that visual game where they look at a bucket, hear a marker word and get a treat from the bucket. And as we build the dog's education, I then use that bucket game to help encourage the dog to do tiny movements sort of left and right with his head and neck. So again, if we're only working with dogs on one side of our body, as well as free work and shaping that free work setup, we can use other really fun, rewarding activities to help that dog maintain as even movement left and right as possible. And that's obviously a picture of Henry being quite content going across the yoga mat. So if I see a dog avoiding something, again, question mark, vet check, I remove it from the free work setup, because once that dog's really happily engaging with free work, we can start adding in more items. It's amazing for dogs that have had a really sheltered life, particularly dogs coming out of lockdown. Start teaching them free work and start adding novel sights in, such as high-vis jackets, different shapes, different outlines, things like wheelbarrows that the dog might not have seen, buckets if a dog hasn't seen that. It's amazing how many dogs are thrown by a bucket being upturned. And again, we start to give or keep those little question marks over dogs that are reactive or sensitive to unfamiliar people. Actually, when we start to look at their response to their environment, they're actually really sensitive to anything novel, and that includes people too. So a dog I've been recently helping, I recognized really struggled as the light was changing and was really thrown by shadows because he probably hadn't seen many. He was living in a flat, and obviously the guardians really couldn't give him that many experiences. And when lockdown was obviously restricted to only going out for exercise, you know, a few times a day if you had an animal, and only once for your own personal exercise, you know, he probably didn't get exposed to quite as many different things as dogs would in normal times. And interestingly, he also had the same response to people that were all in black. So again, we can introduce sort of dark shapes, cutouts. We can do anything within free work, building on this familiar. And when we introduce a harness, for example, so we start with the dog completely free, no collar, no harness, nothing. Sometimes when we even pick up the harness, the dog will suddenly pick up pace around free work, or suddenly start avoiding some of the treats he'd really enjoyed before the appearance of the harness. So again, we start to be able to highlight really small detail of where that dog struggles long before he steps outside. I mean, it's amazing for shelter dogs in rescue, because we can then take modified versions back to kennels that we know the dogs enjoyed. We also can use that free work setup for introducing new people. The dog is engaging in activity that's been rewarding for that dog, and a new person can just be near that area, keeps that new person away from that dog. The dog can approach that person at their own pace. And we can also add in items of clothing from unfamiliar people into the free work setup, so the dog gets the chance to go and pick up that data from that person's scent from their clothing, like their jacket or a spare sweatshirt or something, without having to approach that unfamiliar person. And that was a great tip from my wonderful, amazing friend, Sarah Heath. So really the applications are endless, and the way we can set up the free work is, you know, endless as well. I then start counting, dropping food as I engage with the dog. So I start to switch from having loads of food available, although it's not an all-you-can-eat buffet. I do want different textures of treats there. I start switching to having a few pieces of treats available, but now the food's coming from me. But I always want some food available to the dog, so I'm not creating that conflict by the dog having to engage with me in order to get the food. And then within that free work, I might start teaching a settle. We might start introducing body contact. I have a mat in the free work setup, or a blanket, whatever the dog's going to be more comfortable on, because some dogs like cold textures, other dogs like warmer, softer textures, depends on the dog. And then we can start helping to teach more layers. And this young dog was a young collie who had bilateral hip dysplasia. I think he was in his third home by the time he came to me. And within free work, we were able to identify areas of his body where we could probably start building body contact, so that guardians were able to introduce body contact in places that were more rewarding for him. And we're also to give him the opportunity to process other sensory information rather than just sound, because he was really noise sensitive. And in our second session, we just started to teach a settle by just paying him every time he came to the mat. And he really needed to hold on to that ball. So again, when I hear people say, my dog loves balls, it's like, question mark. And in free work, it's amazing. We'll always have the dog's favorite toy as well. And dogs rarely behave the way their guardians think they're going to behave. But we start to recognize when the dog needs to pick up that toy. because it is a need quite often. And several times for dogs that have enjoyed balls, their ball's been left in the free work setup, guardians have been amazed that their dog didn't engage with the ball at all, didn't pick it up, didn't fling it around, didn't run around with it in their mouth. They just explored all the sensory items that were available to them until there was maybe noise in the environment. And then the dog would run and grab the ball. And the guardians recognized that they needed to rethink the belief system that their dogs loved the ball. They were like, wow, my dog needs the ball, and I need to look at why. It's like, yes, keep questioning everything. Question everything.
There's one comment that's actually a really good point. Yanka is, I'll just show it actually because it's easier. Can I ask, would you do free work with a dog that guards resources, mainly food?
Oh, really good question. I would be very careful. Yes, it can be really successful, but I would use less food and I would use more scent items. So Henry, my dog, can get quite aroused around food. So I tend to have a lot of scent items, like I'll have rugs from our horses, I'll have bedding from our donkey barn, except that's less interesting to him now because it's so familiar to him. I'll gather sheep wool, I'll get dried leaves, obviously making sure it's not toxic, but I have them in sacks so that they're not scattered everywhere. I'll get maybe bedding from another dog, maybe, if we've got other dogs on the property, different clothing. Anything really, anything that can kind of bring the outside world in. I saw a lovely post where somebody's dog couldn't go out and they'd gone round and used cloths and picked up scent from their familiar walks and brought those back for their dog to sniff. So we can again be really creative. I'd be really cautious, obviously, but would use more scent and maybe tiny bits of paste on items in the environment, like a wall or something, so there was less of an object for that dog to need to guard. And with any resource guarding, again, you've got to ask the question, have we got underlying pain? Because any of those kind of automatic defensive behaviors often are exaggerated and exacerbated by pain, including things that look like potential resource guarding when it comes to being on a sofa. Again, goes back to what we might see in free work with a dog avoiding walking over soft surfaces. And it's so often the sensation of someone sitting on a cushion next to a dog and that cushion moving beneath the dog that then moves sensitive bones or sensitive soft tissue that makes the dog sensitive to that person even starting to approach the sofa. And so many dogs get punished for this, but it's not a resource issue, it's a pain issue that's just been inadvertently overlooked. So I'd have a big question mark around digestive pain as well, if dogs are protective around food. And again, that's a pattern that I've seen increase over the last probably 10 years at least. And I don't think it's just that we're more aware of it. So I would look at the dog's behavior around a food bowl. Does the dog avoid? Does the dog start to get tense in the body? Does the dog belch after eating, back away? Does grabbing increase? And again, in free work, after eating something, does the dog go and pick up a particular type of toy? Because another thing that I'm seeing parallels with is the need to create some degree of resistance in the body when there's some discomfort somewhere, and that includes again that gastric pain. So dogs tend to get more mouthy and need to pull after they've eaten maybe food stuff that's irritated their stomach slightly, if they've got acid reflux issues, or maybe food that has made them feel slightly unwell. So again, we start to see quite strong clues that we might need to address some dietary issues too. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, that's great.
Caution, and also because we're using scattered food, it can be helpful because the dog's not just looking after one food bowl. But yes, proceed with caution. So then I start to shape my free work setup and add more items for that dog to walk over. So we start to really get really good coordination, provided I know that my dog is not in any discomfort. And also within free work, I take what the dog offers. Pause up's really meaningful for Henry. It's really meaningful for lots of dogs. And again, that kind of creating pressure in the body, is it linked to discomfort somewhere else? Because he really likes pause up on things, and he does have dietary sensitivity, and he does have hip dysplasia. And hopefully we manage both, but I'm always keeping that question mark. Am I still missing something? And from there, we then take what the dog enjoys and take it outside. So for Henry, being still was really difficult. Sitting was not something that was easy for him due to all the things that were going on for him, including hip dysplasia. But pause up was really meaningful. So when I was out feeding the horses, I didn't have to ask him to sit or stand and stay because that was not easy for him. He just could do pause up on the empty food bowls, which meant he could stay safely on one side of the fence while I went to feed the other horses in the field. And when we used to do the washing up of the food bowls, or we still do, he could offer pause up there. So we take anything that we start to recognize that's meaningful for the dog in free work and move that out into the great outdoors and also into novel environments too. And after Pansy's first session at the farm, she went back and slept in kennels for about 2 hours. And then every week when she'd come, she'd really want to engage in free work first. She'd drag her caregiver into the free work room. Then she'd make it really clear she'd like to go wandering around the farm with us on her, or with her on our right side, not with her on our left side. Her sensitivity to new things in the environment completely just diminished. She could take treats straight away when we did need to turn her away, or if we needed to invite her to change direction, because we weren't causing more problems by turning her in a direction that was difficult for her. She stopped having to jump up at people, and it is a need to jump up at people because people are a bit over enthusiastic in handling. So it isn't that the dog hasn't learned, it's that we're reinforcing the need for that dog to jump up because of the arousal system being around people who overhandle and ruffle and pat sensitive, body parts. And she would then, after going around the fields with us, and we'd have her off lead in the paddock and play some of the games that she'd learned in free work, she'd clearly indicate that she'd want to come back home down to the bottom of the farm. She'd go to the mat, and there she would present her neck or her pelvis or wherever she was in need or accepting of body contact, and we'd do body work, and then she'd switch sides and we'd do body work somewhere else. And then she'd sleep, and we just admire her while we drank cups of tea. And what was really interesting with Pansy too is that she really liked to sit in the water troughs. So again, I've seen this with some dogs too. Question mark. Is a dog that loves water, let's go back to that love word, actually trying to cool down sore joints? I think the answer is they are. Sometimes, not always, but I have seen dogs that go on to be diagnosed with hip issues or other problems, who are then, once on that pain relief, suddenly no longer in need of sitting in water quite as frequently. So again, keep that question mark, and remember to question everything all the time, but never question the dog, because the dog is always right.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. It's been so informative and really, really interesting. And I think a lot of people have said how it's really opened their eyes, particularly to the digestive issues that you have mentioned, and also pain. I'm just trying to see if is it possible to use free work in a veterinary clinic? I remember asking you that question. It's difficult, I find, in a 15-minute slot, but if you have more time, it can be really useful, can't it?
I encourage guardians to set free work up at home and video it, and then edit the relevant parts for the vet, because chronic pain is so hard to identify in a veterinary setting. Lots of dogs become inhibited. You don't have the space all the time, do you? So free work, because the dog starts to slow down, we start to see more obvious issues. When we've got a dog that's busy all the time, we have to ask, is it busy brain or body pain? Are they offloading joints really quickly? Is that why they're really active? Because people often go, well, my dog can't be in pain because my dog's really active. No, activity can be a sign of discomfort. So if we can help slow that dog down, guardians can start to see more detail themselves, but also record it for the vet, so the vet actually gets to see what the guardian has concerns about. And again, when I was working in another shelter, it was really interesting. We had this little terrier came in, and the caregivers took a really lovely long time to put his harness on because he was really harness sensitive, and it took 2 of them to put the harness on, and that's fantastic. And when he came in, I was doing kind of the early stages of free work then, but he was on a line. You also can start free work on a line if you have to do that because you don't have a safe space, or if the dog needs to be contained on a line for safety reasons, for confidence, including confidence. So I was putting treats down on the floor, and it was fascinating because this dog's nose was going, but he was treading on the sausage and it was swishing up between his toes. And I was thinking, why can't this terrier locate the treats? And I looked at his frame, and he was really tight through the whole body, sort of choppy stride, and really tight through the neck. And if we've got a lot of tension on our neck, we can't always smell aromas. So it's got to be the same for dogs. So we just did some like really simple movement stuff, and he went back for a break. Came out of kennels the second time. Oh my gosh, he was so free through the body, found every treat, was really engaged with us, and because he freed up, we could see how lame he was on the right hind. So of course then he was taken straight off to the vet. So again, that just unwinding and resetting can really help find those details that are obviously really important.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I've just got like a stream of everyone saying thank you so much. It's so interesting. So thank you so much. I might have missed a few questions. If I have, I'll go back and answer them all. So don't worry, I will answer you if I haven't got around to it tonight. But thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight too.
Yes, thank you. And just a few quick things. So there was a few people that were asking about training. So you do your ACE free work at Tilley Farm, don't you? Which is just outside of Bath.
And we've got online courses, and the online courses have been so unbelievably rewarding, because what we do is we have a dedicated Facebook group. The online content is available in Teachable for as long as that course will remain online. And we also do live Zoom sessions once or twice a week. And then the students upload their videos of their sessions, and we can give feedback. But because they're recorded, the caregivers get to watch those videos back too. And then we all get to watch everybody else's videos. And that obviously doesn't happen when we've got in-person events happening, because people are separated or looking after their dog, or their dog isn't, so comfortable being in the company of other dogs. So people miss learning from the other participants. So for me, the online courses has been phenomenal, and we are able to help more dogs because they are in the safety of their own home. They can work for 5-10 minutes and have a break and truly rest because they're in a known environment, and we can really help the guardian say, look, that dog stopped blinking then. Look, did you see that ear flick? Did you not see when he started to only breathe through the abdomen instead of that rib cage expanding? So modify what you're doing. It's been phenomenal. So yes, we do it at Tilley Farm, but we're also online.
Fabulous. So a gift that we can say thank you to COVID for.
I'm going to keep teaching online. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's fabulous. And CAM are also really interested in seeing your gait videos, because we're trying to create a database of gaits to as a training tool, so that we can use that as part of our new website. So please send in your videos of your dogs and their sort of gait videos of them walking. We like, if you can, walking towards the camera, away from the camera, and then across the camera, and then across the other camera, and that would be really helpful, and it would be such an amazing tool for us to help people and our owners to recognise certain things in their dogs and in their dog's gait in particular. So please do that. And then the other thing that I need to mention is that Hannah has put her heart and soul into the latest CAM Advocate course. So if you did want to find out more about pain behaviour and in particular osteoarthritis, the CAM Advocate course is on our CAM website, and there is an owner course as well that's going to be coming out very soon. Hannah's just finishing it up, so that's all very exciting. So it's been wonderful. We really appreciate you coming and joining us, and we're so lucky to have you, Sarah. I'm going to end the broadcast now, so bye everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.